The village of Elmsbrook had always been a place of peace. Nestled between towering mountains and a dense forest, it had the kind of charm that made you feel safe, almost as if it were untouched by time. The villagers lived simple lives, farming the land, tending to their animals, and maintaining a close-knit community. Life moved slowly here, and that was just the way everyone liked it. But on one cold, biting winter morning, something was about to happen that would shatter the calm. It started as a typical day. Ethan, a young farmer in his early 30s, woke before dawn as usual. He rubbed the sleep from his eyes and pulled on his boots, ready for another long day of tending to his fields. But something felt off. There was an unsettling stillness in the air, a silence that didn't feel natural, even for a quiet winter's day. The village was still, but as Ethan looked out the window of his cabin, he saw something that made his heart race. A figure, a large, shadowy shape, appeared at the edge of the forest. At first, Ethan thought it was one of the villagers, perhaps coming to visit, but the figure wasn't walking, it was stumbling, moving in an unnatural way. Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, so he grabbed his coat and went outside, stepping into the crisp, freezing air. The snow crunched beneath his boots, the silence almost oppressive. As he made his way toward the figure, his breath formed clouds in the cold morning air, and he realized that whatever this creature was, it didn't belong. As Ethan got closer, he could see more clearly. It was a horse. A large, shaggy animal, covered in matted fur and clearly malnourished. The horse stumbled through the snow, its movement sluggish, as though it were injured or sick. Ethan's heart softened. This horse wasn't wild, at least, not completely. It had been domesticated at some point, yet here it was, lost and abandoned, wandering in the harsh wilderness. The horse stopped when it saw Ethan. It was cautious, its large eyes wide with fear, yet there was something else, something that looked almost like relief, as if the horse had been waiting for someone to come to its aid. Ethan, sensing its vulnerability, moved slowly, not wanting to startle it. He spoke softly, trying to calm the animal, but it was clearly terrified. The horse had been through something, and Ethan could see that it was badly injured, likely from a fight or from trying to survive in the wild alone. With every step Ethan took, the horse's anxiety grew. Its eyes darted nervously, and it took a step back. But as Ethan knelt down and slowly extended his hand, the horse took a cautious step forward, nudging him gently with its nose. It was a moment of trust, and in that instant, Ethan knew that this horse had no one else. It was alone, abandoned, and lost, but it had found him. Ethan carefully led the horse back toward his cabin, his thoughts racing. Where had it come from? How had it gotten so far from the nearest stable or farm? And why had it been abandoned? He knew the forest could be unforgiving, especially during the winter months, but this horse was more than just a stray animal, it was a survivor. Over the next few days, Ethan nursed the horse back to health, feeding it, cleaning its wounds, and providing it shelter in his barn. He named the horse Storm because of the wild, untamed look in its eyes, like a force of nature that couldn't be tamed, no matter how hard it tried. But something was still bothering him. The way the horse had reacted when it first saw him, it wasn't just fear. There was something more. It was as if Storm had been trying to tell him something, to warn him about something dangerous. Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just a random encounter. One evening, as Ethan sat by the fire, mulling over the events of the past few days, he heard a strange noise outside. At first, it was just the usual creaking of the old house in the wind, but then there was something else, a faint rumbling sound, like distant thunder. Ethan stood up and stepped outside, his eyes scanning the horizon. The wind was picking up again, and the clouds overhead were growing darker. But it wasn't just the storm that worried him. The sound of rumbling was growing louder, closer. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. The sound wasn't thunder, it was the sound of hooves. A stampede. A herd of wild cattle, hundreds of them, were charging toward the village. They had been spotted in the area before, but this was different. The herd was panicked, disoriented. They were moving in a frenzy, and they were heading straight for Elmsbrook. Ethan ran back inside and grabbed his coat, rushing to the village square to warn the others. The villagers were already gathering, seeing the smoke rising in the distance from the Stampede's destruction. They were terrified. The herd wasn't just a few cows, this was a massive force of nature, a wave of wild animals that could crush everything in its path. If they couldn't redirect the herd, it would destroy the village, the fields, and everything the villagers had worked for. Ethan knew they had no time to waste. But as panic spread throughout the village, Ethan had a strange feeling that there was still a chance. He glanced over at the barn, where Storm stood watching. The horse seemed unusually calm, its gaze fixed on the horizon. Ethan had an idea. He didn't know why, but he had a sense that Storm knew what to do. The horse had survived in the wild for so long, maybe it understood how to handle such a situation. Ethan had no other choice. He quickly saddled Storm and mounted the horse, urging it forward. Storm moved through the snow with an incredible speed, and as they galloped toward the edge of the village, Ethan could feel the urgency building inside him. The sound of the stampede was growing louder, the ground beneath them trembling with each passing second. Ethan knew the herd was close. If they didn't act now, they would be too late. But Storm, guided by something deeper than instinct, seemed to know exactly where to go. It headed straight toward the cliffs that bordered the village. These cliffs weren't just a barrier, they were a natural path that the herd sometimes used when migrating, a path that would redirect them toward safer, more open ground. As they reached the edge of the cliffs, Ethan urged Storm to climb the narrow trail that led up to a high ridge. From there, he would have a clear view of the herd's movement. The horse obeyed without hesitation, scaling the steep, icy terrain with surprising ease, despite its earlier injuries. From the top of the ridge, Ethan could see the herd approaching fast, their massive bodies thundering across the fields. They were disoriented, frightened, and headed straight for the village. But Storm wasn't just a passive observer. With a commanding neigh, the horse stamped its hooves, letting out a loud, powerful cry that echoed through the valley. The herd faltered, their movements slowing as they heard the sound. Ethan urged Storm forward, using the horse's powerful voice to guide the herd, steering them away from the village. The horse moved with precision, darting across the ridge and using its size and strength to herd the animals. It was a stunning display of leadership, something that Ethan could never have imagined from an animal he had found abandoned just days before. The herd, confused by the sudden shift in direction, began to veer away from the village, following Storm's lead. The tension in Ethan's chest began to ease as the last of the cattle passed, moving safely away from the village and into the open fields. When Ethan returned to the village, the villagers erupted into cheers. The storm had passed, and the threat of the stampede was over. The herd had been redirected, and the village was safe. Everyone gathered around Ethan, overwhelmed by what had just happened. They had witnessed the impossible. The horse, an abandoned animal just days before, had saved them. The villagers couldn't believe it. The wild, untamed horse that had wandered into their lives had become their protector, guiding the herd away from destruction. Storm wasn't just a stray animal, it was a hero. Ethan stood beside Storm, his heart swelling with pride. "This horse didn't just save us," he said to the crowd. "It led the way. It showed us that the wild has its own wisdom, its own strength. Sometimes, the greatest heroes come from the most unlikely places." The village of Elmsbrook would never forget the day they were saved by a horse that had once been abandoned, a horse that had taught them the true meaning of survival, strength, and the bond between humans and the wild. Storm lived the rest of his days in the village, free to roam the fields and woods. But he was never just a wild animal, he was a hero, a protector, and a reminder that sometimes, the greatest acts of courage come from the most unexpected places. Years later, Storm's story lived on in Elmsbrook. The villagers kept the tale of the horse that saved them alive, passing it down to their children. And when a new generation of villagers stood at the edge of the village, looking toward the mountains, they would remember the wild horse that had shown them the power of nature, and how sometimes, the most unassuming heroes are the ones who can make the greatest difference.